Some years ago, I had a conversation with a layman about flying saucers. And because I am scientific, I know all about flying saucers. Well, I don't really, but people assume that if you're a scientist, you must know everything about every mysterious thing that happens. So this fellow says to me, I don't think there are flying saucers. Wait, no, I said that. I said, I don't think there are flying saucers. And so my antagonist said, is it impossible that there are flying saucers? Can you prove that it's impossible? No, I said, I can't prove it's impossible. It's just very unlikely. At that he said, you are very unscientific. If you can't prove it impossible, then how can you say that it's unlikely? But that is the way that is scientific. It is scientific only to say what is more likely and what is less likely, and not to be proving all the time the possible and impossible. You see, in science, we don't deal in certainties the way people think we do. We deal in probabilities. We make our best guesses based on the evidence we have. Now, to define what I mean by unlikely, I might have said to him, listen, I mean that from my knowledge of the world that I see around me, I think that it is much more likely that the reports of flying saucers are the results of the known irrational characteristics of terrestrial intelligence than of the unknown rational efforts of extraterrestrial intelligence. It's just more likely, that's all. It's a good guess. And we always try to guess the most likely explanation, keeping in the back of the mind the fact that if it doesn't work, we must discuss the other possibilities. Now let me be clear about something important here. There's a tremendous difference between two questions that people often confuse. The first question is there life elsewhere in the universe? The second question is, are flying saucers visiting Earth? These are completely different questions, and it's important not to mix them up. On the first question about whether there's life elsewhere in the universe, I would say this is actually quite likely. Look, we've got hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, hundreds of billions, and we now know that planets are common around these stars. The universe is so enormous that it would be rather peculiar if Earth were the only place where life arose. When you think about the sheer numbers involved, it seems quite probable that life has emerged in other places, maybe many places. But now comes the second question, which is an entirely different matter. Are these hypothetical alien beings visiting Earth in flying saucers? This is where things become much more unlikely. And let me tell you why. First, let's think about the distances involved. The nearest star to us is about 4 light years away. That means that light traveling at 186,000 miles per second takes 4 years to get here from there. Now, if you want to travel at near light speed, you run into all sorts of problems. You need enormous amounts of energy. The faster you go, according to relativity, the more energy you need. To get a spaceship up to near light speed requires more energy than we can even imagine producing. And even if you could somehow solve that problem, the trip would take years, even decades or centuries, depending on where you're coming from. So these aliens would have to be extraordinarily motivated to come all this way just to fly around and be seen by a few people, and then leave without making any real contact. It seems rather odd, doesn't it? Now people say, but maybe they have technology we can't imagine. Maybe they've solved these problems. And that's possible, sure. Anything is possible. But you see, this is exactly the problem I was talking about earlier. The question isn't whether it's possible, but whether it's probable. And given what we know about physics, it's not very probable. Here's another thing that strikes me as peculiar about these flying saucer reports. If we come to the case of flying saucers, we have the difficulty that almost everybody who observes flying saucers sees something different, unless they were previously informed of what they were supposed to see. One person sees lights in the sky, another sees a disc-shaped craft, another sees humanoid beings. They can't all be right. And here's something else to think about. Why now? Why didn't these flying saucers show up earlier in human history? Just when we're getting scientific enough to appreciate the possibility of traveling from one place to another, here come the flying saucers. Before our modern era of rockets and space travel, people saw strange things in the sky too, but they didn't interpret them as visitors from other planets. They saw them as angels or demons or signs from God. The interpretation changes with our technological development, you see. This tells us something about human psychology rather than about alien visitors. Now, let me get back to this business about life in the universe, because it's worth thinking about more carefully. When we think about what life might be like on other planets, we have to be very careful not to be too narrow-minded. Life on Earth is based on chemistry, on carbon and water and proteins and DNA. But we only have one example. We only know about life on Earth. People say, well, life can't exist without oxygen. But wait a minute. Life exists underwater, where there's very little free oxygen. In fact, life started in the sea. Or people say, you have to be able to move around and have nerves. But plants have no nerves. They're alive. Just think for a few minutes about the variety of life there is on Earth alone. We have bacteria that live in boiling hot springs. We have fish that live at tremendous pressures at the bottom of the ocean in complete darkness. We have organisms that don't need sunlight at all. And you see, when you think about the diversity of life on Earth, you begin to realize something. If a flying saucer really did land here and something came out of it, that thing isn't going to be anything like what anybody describes. It's not going to be a little green man with a big head and big eyes. That's absurd. That's just humans with different proportions. Any life that evolved independently on another planet would be so different from us, so alien in ways we can't even imagine, that we probably wouldn't recognize it as life at first. It would be based on entirely different chemistry, different biology, different everything. The whole notion that aliens would look like humans, or even remotely like anything familiar to us, shows a failure of imagination. Now, I've argued about flying saucers with lots of people, and I'm interested in this question. They keep arguing that it is possible, and that's true. It is possible. But they do not appreciate that the problem is not to demonstrate whether it's possible or not, but whether it's going on or not. There's a big difference there. You see, many, many things are possible. It's possible that there's a teapot orbiting the sun somewhere between Earth and Mars. I can't prove there isn't, but that doesn't mean I should believe it's there. It's possible that invisible pink unicorns exist. Can you prove they don't? No. But we don't go around believing in them because there's no evidence for them. Science is about evidence. It's about making the best explanation we can based on what we observe. And what do we observe with flying saucers? We observe things that can be explained much more simply by other means. Someone sees lights in the sky. Well, it could be Venus. Venus is very bright. It's the brightest thing in the sky after the sun and the moon. And many people who live in cities aren't used to looking at the sky carefully. When they suddenly see Venus shining brightly, particularly in the evening or early morning, they're startled. They think, what is that bright light? And if they're in a moving car, they get the illusion that Venus is following them, because Venus is so far away that it doesn't change position relative to the horizon as you move. Or people see aircraft lights, or weather balloons, or atmospheric phenomena that we don't fully understand yet. Or sometimes they see things that are the result of what I would call the irrational characteristics of terrestrial intelligence. That means people making things up, or misremembering, or letting their imaginations run away with them, or just seeing what they expect to see rather than what's actually there. The human mind is not a perfect recording device. We know this from psychology. People's memories change over time. They incorporate details from stories they heard later. They fill in gaps with their imagination. Two people can witness the same event and remember it completely differently. This is just how human brains work. We're not cameras. We're interpreters. We're always trying to make sense of what we see, and sometimes we make sense of it incorrectly. Now, does all this mean that I'm certain there are no aliens visiting Earth? No, I'm not certain about anything. I'm a scientist. We don't do certainty. What I'm saying is that based on everything I know about physics, about astronomy, about human psychology, about the way evidence works, it is much, much more likely that flying saucer reports are misidentifications and misinterpretations than that they are actual alien spacecraft. And here's the thing about being a scientist. You have to be willing to change your mind when new evidence comes in. If somebody landed a flying saucer on the White House lawn tomorrow and aliens stepped out and said hello, well, I'd have to revise my thinking. I'd have to say, okay, I was wrong. Here they are. That's how science works. We follow the evidence wherever it leads. But until that happens, until we have real, solid, reproducible evidence, the flying saucer hypothesis is just not a good explanation for what people are seeing. It requires too many unlikely things to all be true at once. It requires aliens to exist, which is plausible. But then it also requires them to have solved the enormous technical problems of interstellar travel. And then it requires them to come all this way but not make proper contact, just fly around being mysterious. And it requires that all the sightings that can't be explained by simpler means are all alien craft. That's a lot of unlikely things stacked on top of each other. In science, we have a principle sometimes called Occam's razor. It says that when you have two explanations for something, the simpler one is usually better. Not always, but usually. And the simple explanation for flying saucer sightings is that people are seeing ordinary things and misinterpreting them. The complex explanation is that aliens are visiting Earth. Now, let me come back one more time to the question of life in the universe, because I don't want you to think I'm dismissive of this possibility. I'm not. I think it's entirely reasonable to think that life exists elsewhere. The universe is so vast and the chemistry of life is so universal that it would be surprising if we were alone. But here's an important point. Even if life is common in the universe, that doesn't mean intelligent life is common. Evolution on Earth took billions of years to produce us, and there's no guarantee that evolution on another planet would produce anything we'd recognize as intelligent. There are millions of species on Earth, and only one of them has developed technology and civilization. That should tell us something about how special or unusual that particular development might be. And even if intelligent life were common, that doesn't mean technological civilizations last very long. Maybe most civilizations destroy themselves shortly after discovering nuclear weapons or damaging their planets beyond repair. Maybe the window during which a civilization is both advanced enough to send signals into space and still exists is very, very short. This could explain why we haven't detected any signals from other civilizations, even though they might exist. This is sometimes called the Fermi Paradox, after Enrico Fermi, who supposedly asked, "Where is everybody? If the universe is teeming with intelligent life, why haven't we seen any evidence of it? Why no radio signals? Why no giant structures in space? Why no visits?" There are many possible answers to this question. Maybe space travel is just too hard and nobody does it. Maybe civilizations tend to destroy themselves. Maybe we're early and intelligent life will become common in the future but isn't common now. Maybe aliens are out there but they're ignoring us, or they haven't noticed us yet. Maybe they communicate in ways we haven't thought of. Or maybe, just maybe, intelligent life is actually very, very rare, and we're one of the few examples of it in our galaxy, or even in the observable universe. That's a sobering thought, isn't it? It makes us rather precious if it's true. But here's what I want you to take away from all this. The question of whether we're alone in the universe is a profound one. It's one of the deepest questions we can ask, and we should take it seriously. We should look for evidence of life on other planets. We should search for signals from other civilizations. We should think carefully about what life might be like in different environments. This is good science, but we should also be careful about what we believe. We should ask for evidence. We should test our ideas. We should consider alternative explanations, and we should be honest about what we know and what we don't know. Right now, we know that the universe is vast. We know that the ingredients for life are common. We know that planets are common. Those are reasons to think life might be common too, but we don't know for sure. We're looking, we're searching, and maybe someday we'll find something. What we don't have is any good evidence that flying saucers are visiting Earth. The evidence for that is poor. It consists of eyewitness reports, which are notoriously unreliable. It consists of blurry photographs that could be anything. It consists of stories that change in the telling. It's not the kind of evidence that would convince a scientist. If you want to convince a scientist that aliens are visiting Earth, here's what you need. You need a piece of alien technology that we can examine. Not a story about technology, actual hardware. Something that we can take apart, study, analyze, and confirm is not from Earth. Or you need biological evidence. An alien organism, alive or dead, that we can study and confirm has a different evolutionary history from everything on Earth. Or you need clear, unambiguous communication, a message that could only come from an intelligent source and could not have originated on Earth. These are the kinds of evidence that would change minds, not stories, not blurry photos, not government reports that say, we saw something, but we don't know what it was. Real, physical, testable evidence. Until we have that kind of evidence, the scientific position is to say, aliens visiting Earth is possible, but unlikely. Life elsewhere in the universe is possible, and maybe even likely, but these are different questions, and we should be careful not to confuse them. And you know what? There's something wonderful about not knowing. There's something exciting about living in a time when we're just beginning to be able to search for life on other worlds. We're sending robots to Mars. We're studying the atmospheres of planets around other stars. We're listening for signals. We're looking. In my lifetime, we've gone from not even knowing for sure that other stars have planets to having confirmed thousands of planets around other stars. That's extraordinary. Maybe in your lifetime, we'll discover evidence of life beyond Earth. Maybe we'll find bacteria on Mars, or in the oceans under the ice of Europa, or Enceladus. Maybe we'll detect a biosignature in the atmosphere of a distant planet. Maybe we'll even receive a message from another civilization, or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll search and find nothing, and that would tell us something too. It would tell us that we're rare, perhaps very rare, and that would make life even more precious than we thought. But whatever we discover, we should follow the evidence. We should think clearly. We should be skeptical of extraordinary claims that lack extraordinary evidence. And we should never stop being curious, never stop asking questions, never stop looking for the truth. That's what science is about. Not about knowing everything, but about asking good questions and trying to answer them as honestly as we can. And on this question of aliens and flying saucers, the honest answer, based on what we know now, is life elsewhere is quite possible and worth looking for. But flying saucers visiting Earth, that's very unlikely, based on the evidence we have. And if you don't like that answer, well, that's fine. You're free to believe what you want. But if you want to change what science thinks, you need to bring better evidence. That's how it works. That's how it should work. And that, I think, is about all I can tell you about aliens and flying saucers. It's not everything, but it's a start. The universe is a big place, full of mysteries. Some of those mysteries we'll solve. Some of them might solve themselves when we least expect it, and some of them might remain mysteries forever. But the joy is in the searching, in the wondering, in the trying to understand. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us curious. And maybe, just maybe, that curiosity will lead us to discover that we're not alone after all. Wouldn't that be something?